When my son Anthony told me I wasn't invited to his anniversary party because I might embarrass his wife's siblings, I smiled, nodded politely, and drove straight to the bank. By the next morning, their mortgage payments would stop, and that was just the beginning of my plan. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I'd driven over to help set up for Anthony and Priscilla's 5th anniversary celebration. My truck loaded with folding tables for my business. The party was supposed to be at their house tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. At least, that's what I thought. I was unloading tables from the garage when I heard voices drifting through the kitchen window. Priscilla was talking to someone on speakerphone, her tone animated in that way rich people get when they're gossiping. "Oh, Bradford, you should have seen last Sunday dinner," she was saying. Vinny brought homemade wine in old Chianti bottles and started telling stories about the old neighborhood. The whole house smelled like garlic for hours afterward. I mean, it's charming in its own way, but you know how these ethnic families can be. A man's voice responded through the speaker, cultured and dismissive. "Darling, you can't let Anthony's father turn every gathering into some sort of Italian festival. There are standards to maintain, especially with our friends coming tomorrow." That would be Bradford Worthington III, Priscilla's older brother, investment banker, yacht club member, the kind of man who'd never worked a day with his hands, but somehow felt qualified to judge those who did. Courtney's voice joined the conversation, high-pitched and nasal. "Priscilla, sweetie, you have to be firm about this. We've worked so hard to elevate Anthony's social standing. One crude family dinner could undo months of progress." I set down the table I was carrying and stepped closer to the window. These people were talking about my Sunday dinners like they were some kind of embarrassment. The same dinners where I'd made Anthony's favorite ossobuco every week for 29 years. "I think you're right," Priscilla said with a sigh. "Maybe it would be better if the party was more refined this time. Just our circle, you know? People who understand proper entertaining." My hands clenched around the metal table leg. Proper entertaining. Like there was something improper about breaking bread with family, about stories passed down through generations, about wine made by your own grandfather's hands. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. I finished unloading the tables in silence, each one hitting the garage floor with a satisfying clang. By the time Anthony found me 20 minutes later, I'd worked through my initial anger and settled into something much more dangerous. Clarity. "Dad." "Hey," Anthony said, appearing in the garage doorway. His face was flushed, and he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Of course." I leaned against my truck and waited. "So, about tomorrow night." He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Priscilla's been thinking, and maybe it would be better if we kept it small this time. You know, just immediate family and a few close friends." "I see. And I take it I don't qualify as immediate family?" "Dad, that's not what I meant." He looked miserable, caught between his wife and his father. "It's just that Brad and Courtney have some important friends coming, and they think the party should be more, well, sophisticated." Sophisticated. I repeated the word slowly, tasting its implications. And my presence would somehow compromise that sophistication? Anthony's shoulders sagged. "They don't understand our family the way I do. They think Sunday dinners are too loud, too ethnic. They say I need to distance myself from all that if I want to succeed in their world." Their world. I looked around the garage at the folding tables I brought, thinking about all the celebrations those tables had seen. Communion parties, graduations, birthday celebrations where 3 generations gathered around food made with love instead of catered by professionals. "You know what, son?" I said, my voice steady and calm. "You're right. This party should be exactly what Priscilla and her siblings want it to be." Relief flooded Anthony's face. "Really? You understand?" "Completely." I started loading the tables back into my truck. "You shouldn't have to worry about your crude, ethnic father embarrassing you in front of sophisticated people." He winced at my phrasing, but didn't contradict it. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd get it." "Oh, I get it perfectly." I slammed the truck's tailgate shut with more force than necessary. "Have a wonderful refined party, Anthony." I'm sure it'll be everything Brad and Courtney dreamed of. I drove home through Fairfield's tree-lined streets, past houses that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Houses like the one I'd been helping Anthony pay for since he married into the Worthington family 2 years ago. The numbers started adding up in my head as I navigated traffic. The down payment when they bought the house, $120,000 from my business account. The monthly loan payments I've been covering when Anthony's marketing job couldn't stretch to their mortgage, for $1,000 every month for 24 months. The kitchen renovation when Priscilla decided granite countertops were essential for entertaining. $35,000 on my credit card. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd calculated $890,000. Nearly $900,000 of my money poured into creating the sophisticated lifestyle that was apparently too good for the man who'd funded it. I walked into my house and poured myself a glass of the same homemade wine Priscilla had mocked. My grandfather's recipe, aged in my basement, shared with love at Sunday dinners that were now too crude for polite company. The wine tasted like tradition, like family, like everything the Worthingtons would never understand. I raised a glass and a toast to the empty room. To proper entertaining, I said. Then I reached for my phone and dialed First National Bank's business line. I knew the number by heart. After all, I'd been making loan payments from this account for 2 years. Mr. Torino, what can we do for you tonight? The voice was professional, efficient. I need to cancel some automatic transfers, I said, settling into my kitchen chair. All the transfers going to account number 7749 to 2851. The house loan, the line of credit, everything. Are you sure, sir? That's quite a few significant monthly payments. I looked around my modest kitchen, at the photos of Anthony from every stage of his life, at the empty chair where my wife Maria used to sit before cancer took her 3 years ago. Before I'd started trying to buy my son's love through his new family's expensive lifestyle. I'm absolutely certain, I said. Cancel them all, effective immediately. Done, sir. Is there anything else we can help you with? No, that covers everything. I hung up and finished my wine. Tomorrow morning, the bank would start calling about missed payments. By tomorrow afternoon, Anthony and Priscilla would realize their sophisticated lifestyle had a very unsophisticated foundation. By tomorrow evening, while they were entertaining their refined friends, they'd be dealing with some very crude financial realities. I poured another glass of wine and raised it to Maria's photo on the kitchen counter. Salute my love, I whispered. Time to teach our son about family values. The next morning, I remembered I had left my cordless drill in Anthony's garage. Not that I was eager to see anyone after yesterday's revelation, but good tools don't replace themselves. I drove over around 10, figuring they'd both be at work, and I could slip in and out without awkward conversations. Anthony's car was gone, but Priscilla's white BMW sat in the driveway. I parked on the street and walked up to the garage, hoping to grab my drill and leave before anyone noticed. The side door was unlocked, and I could see my bright yellow DeWalt sitting on the workbench where I'd left it. That's when I heard the voices coming from the kitchen. The window was cracked open to let in the October breeze, and Priscilla was on another one of her speakerphone calls. I should have taken my drill and left, but something in her tone made me pause. I'm telling you, Courtney, it's worse than we thought, Priscilla was saying. Last night, he brought over tables that looked like they came from a church basement. Anthony just stood there nodding like it was perfectly normal. Bradford's voice cut through the speaker, dripping with disdain. Darling, we simply cannot allow this to continue. The man is dragging down the entire family's social standing. Did you see how he dresses? Those polyester pants and work boots to every occasion. I looked down at my khakis and leather work boots. Polyester? These were wool blend slacks from Macy's, and the boots were Italian leather that had cost me $300. More than Bradford probably spent on his silk ties. Courtney's laugh was like fingernails on glass. The worst part is how proud he is of that little garbage business. At the Henderson's cocktail party last month, he actually tried to explain the difference between commercial and residential waste management. I thought Margaret Henderson was going to faint. They all laughed at that. 3 voices united in their amusement at my expense. I set down my drill, and moved closer to the window. The solution is obvious, Bradford continued. We need to civilize the family, starting with Anthony. Get him completely separated from his father's influence. Maybe relocate him to our Boston office. Put some geographic distance between them. That's brilliant, Priscilla said. But what about the money situation? We can't exactly cut ties while Anthony's father is still funding our lifestyle. Ah, that's where phase 2 comes in, Bradford said, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. I've been researching Torino waste management. It's actually quite profitable, but it's run like some mom-and-pop operation. If we could acquire it, modernize the operations, rebrand it as something more respectable, we'd solve 2 problems at once. Courtney squealed with excitement. Bradford, you're a genius. We could turn it into some sort of environmental consulting firm. Much more sophisticated than garbage collection. Exactly. And once we own the business, we control the narrative. No more embarrassing family stories about immigrant grandparents and homemade wine. We could even relocate the old man to Florida or something. Give him a nice retirement package in exchange for silence. My hands clenched into fists. They weren't just planning to exclude me from family gatherings. They were plotting to steal my life's work and exile me from my own son's life. The only problem, Priscilla said, is that Anthony still has some sentimental attachment to his father. We'd need to be subtle about it. Leave that to me, Bradford replied. I'll have our lawyers draw up some preliminary paperwork. Make it look like we're doing the old man a favor, helping him cash out before the industry changes too much. Anthony won't object if he thinks it's in his father's best interest. They were still laughing about their brilliant plan when Priscilla's phone started ringing with a different call. She put the siblings on hold to answer. Hello? Her voice shifted from conspiratorial to concerned in seconds. What do you mean, mispayment? That's impossible. The transfers are automatic. I pressed closer to the window, watching through the gap in the curtains as Priscilla's face went pale. I don't understand, she continued. Mr. Torino has been making those payments for 2 years. Are you sure the account information is correct? A pause while she listened. $8,400? Due immediately? She sank onto a kitchen stool, running her hand through her perfectly styled hair. There must be some mistake. Can you hold, please? She clicked back to her siblings. Brad, Courtney, we have a problem. The bank is saying Anthony's father missed a loan payment. A big one. That's impossible. Bradford's voice came through the speaker. The man may be crude, but he's reliable about money. It's probably just a bank error. No, Priscilla said, her voice rising with panic. They're saying all the automatic transfers have been canceled. The house payment, the line of credit, everything. We're talking about $8,000 due today, with penalties. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Courtney's voice, much less confident than before. Could you have found out about our conversation yesterday? Don't be ridiculous, Bradford said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping in. The man barely understands basic social cues. There's no way he could have figured out our plans. Priscilla was pacing now, her heels clicking on the kitchen tile. What if Anthony said something? What if he told his father about keeping the party refined? That's when Anthony's car pulled into the driveway. I heard his key in the front door. Heard him call out, babe, why are you home? I thought you had that charity meeting. Anthony, thank God, Priscilla called out. We need to talk. Now. I grabbed my drill and slipped out the side door, but I could still hear voices through the kitchen window as I walked to my truck. What do you mean the payment stopped? Anthony's voice was tight with panic. Your father canceled everything, Priscilla said. The bank called this morning. We're in default on the house loan. That's impossible. Dad would never do that without talking to me first. Well, apparently he would. Bradford's voice cut in from the speakerphone. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I started my truck and drove slowly down the street, but not before I heard Anthony say the words I've been dreading. I'll call him right now and straighten this out. My phone started ringing before I'd gone 2 blocks. Anthony's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the time I got home, I had 6 missed calls and 3 increasingly frantic voicemails. The last one was from Priscilla. Vincent, We need you to call the bank immediately and fix whatever misunderstanding happened with the loan payments. This is extremely urgent. I poured myself coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking at my phone. 7 missed calls now. 8. The panic in their voices was almost musical. My landline rang. I answered on the 4th ring. Dad, what the hell is going on? Anthony's voice was strained. The bank says you canceled all our automatic payments. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake. No mistake, son. I decided to redirect my charitable giving to more appreciative recipients. What are you talking about? We're family. You can't just stop the payments without warning. Can I? I sipped my coffee slowly. Seems to me I just did. Dad, please. Priscilla is freaking out. The bank is demanding $8,000 today, or they start foreclosure proceedings. You have to fix this. I have to? That's interesting. Yesterday, your wife's siblings were planning to buy my business and ship me off to Florida. Today, I have to save their financial necks. Funny how quickly things change. The line went silent. Then, in a small voice, how did you know about that? Good tools don't replace themselves, Anthony. Sometimes you have to go back for what belongs to you. I hung up and turned off both phones. Outside, October was settling into afternoon, and somewhere across town, 3 very sophisticated people were learning that refinement doesn't pay the mortgage. It was going to be a beautiful day. The next morning brought a phone call at 7 sharp. Priscilla's voice was all business. The panic from yesterday replaced by forced efficiency. Vincent, we need to resolve this payment situation immediately. I've arranged a meeting with our financial advisor to discuss restructuring the loan terms. Can you be at the Fairfield Country Club at 11? I set down my espresso and walked the window, looking out at my modest neighborhood where people went to work every day instead of having meetings with financial advisors. And why exactly would I need to restructure anything, Priscilla? Because this is a family matter that requires adult conversation, not whatever tantrum you're throwing. Her mask was slipping already. Bradford has connections with several private lending firms. We can work something out that benefits everyone. How generous of him. I glanced at the clock. 11 at the country club, you said? Yes, and Vincent? Please dress appropriately. This is a professional meeting with serious people. Of course. I'll wear my best polyester pants. The line went quiet for a moment. I'll see you at 11, she said, and hung up. I finished my coffee and called Tony Marcelli, my old friend from the Teamsters local. Tony had moved into private investigations after retiring from the docks, and he knew where all the bodies were buried in Fairfield's business community. Tony, it's Vinny Torino. I need a favor. Vinny, how's business treating you, my friend? Can't complain. Listen, I need some background on the Worthington family. Bradford and Courtney Worthington specifically. Investment types, yacht club crowd. The Worthingtons? Tony's voice shifted into business mode. Those trust fund babies? What do you want to know? Everything. Financial situation, business dealings. Anything that might explain why they're so interested in acquiring my company. Give me 2 hours, Tony said. I'll make some calls. At 9:30, Tony called back with information that made everything clear. Vinny, your friends are in deeper shit than a broken septic system. Bradford's investment firm is hemorrhaging clients after some bad trades in tech stocks. Word is he's maybe 6 months from bankruptcy. And the sister? Courtney's been living off trust fund distributions, but the principal is nearly gone. Daddy's old money dried up when he invested in some renewable energy scam. So they're broke? Worse than broke. They're leveraged their eyeballs try and maintain appearances. That country club membership? 3 months behind on dues. Those fancy cars? Leased with payments they can barely make. They need a cash infusion fast, or their whole lifestyle collapses. I thanked Tony and hung up, understanding finally why they were so interested in my little garbage business. It wasn't about social respectability. It was about survival. At 10:30, I put on my best suit and drove toward the country club. But instead of turning into their circular drive, I continued past the Rossetti's Deli, a neighborhood institution that served the best Italian sandwiches in 3 counties. I ordered a meatball sub and settled into a corner booth with a view of the parking lot. At exactly 11 o'clock, My phone started buzzing. Priscilla's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. By 11:15, I'd received 4 missed calls and 2 voicemails. The first was Priscilla trying to sound patient. "Vincent, we're waiting for you in the Oak Room. Please call when you get this." The second, 10 minutes later, had a sharper edge. "The financial advisor has a very busy schedule. We need you here now." I ordered a cannoli and watched the lunch crowd filter in. Construction workers, shop owners, retirees from the neighborhood. Real people doing real work, not sitting in oak panel rooms plotting to steal family businesses. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Mr. Torino? This is Bradford Worthington. I believe you're supposed to be meeting with us?" I took a bite of cannoli before responding. "Bradford, how's the investment business? I heard tech stocks have been challenging lately." Silence on the other end. Then, "We're waiting for you at the country club. Actually, I'm at Rossetti's Deli having lunch. Excellent meatball subs. If you ever want to try food that wasn't prepared by a catering company." "This is extremely unprofessional behavior, Mr. Torino. We've arranged this meeting specifically for your benefit." "My benefit?" I laughed loud enough that Mrs. Rossetti looked over from behind the counter. "Bradford, let me explain something about business. When someone wants to buy my company, they come to my office. They don't summon me to their country club, like I'm applying for a job." I could hear muffled conversation in the background, probably Priscilla and Courtney whispering urgently. "Look," Bradford continued, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was reasonableness. "We're family now. We should be able to work together for everyone's mutual benefit." Family. I finished my cannoli and signaled Mrs. Rossetti for another espresso. "Tell me, Bradford, when exactly did I become family? Was it before or after you decided to exile me, Florida?" More background whisperers, these ones sounding panicked. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're clearly misunderstanding the situation." "Am I?" "Because from where I sit, it sounds like your investment firm is failing. Your sister's trust fund is depleted, and you need my business to stay financially afloat." Did I misunderstand any of that? The line went quiet except for the sound of chairs scraping and urgent whispers. "Mr. Torino," a new voice came on the line, professional and crisp. "This is Richard Blackstone from Blackstone Financial Advisory. Perhaps we could reschedule this meeting for a more convenient time?" "Mr. Blackstone," I said, stirring sugar into my espresso, "I appreciate your time, but I'm not interested in selling my business to people who think I'm an embarrassment to their social circle. I understand there may have been some family miscommunication, but I assure you our offer would be quite generous." "I'm sure it would be. Unfortunately, I prefer doing business with people who respect me enough to tell me the truth about their financial situation." I could hear Bradford's voice in the background, sharp and angry. "Just tell him we'll match any reasonable offer." "Actually, Mr. Blackstone," I said, standing up and leaving money on the table for Mrs. Rossetti, "I need to go. I'm having dinner tonight with my son, and I want to make sure I'm dressed appropriately. Apparently, my usual attire is too crude for sophisticated company." I hung up and walked to my truck, already knowing what was coming next. The angry confrontation, the threats, the demands that I be reasonable. But first, I had to stop to make at Anthony's office. It was time to have a conversation with my son before his wife's siblings could spin this morning's events into another example of my instability. My phone was already ringing again as I drove through the October afternoon. The panic in their voices was music to my ears. They'd expected to intimidate a simple businessman into selling his life's work. Instead, they'd learned that this simple businessman had been watching them much more carefully than they'd been watching him. The game was just getting started, and they were already 3 moves behind. By the time I reached Anthony's office building, I had 12 missed calls and a voicemail from Courtney that began, "Vincent, this childish behavior needs to stop immediately." I smiled and turned off my phone. Childish behavior was exactly what they were about to get. I was enjoying a quiet dinner of leftover osso buco when the pounding started on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of aggressive hammering that announced pure fury had arrived on my doorstep. Through the peephole, I could see 4 figures crowded on my small porch like an angry delegation. Bradford stood in the center, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage. Courtney flanked him, her perfect hair disheveled from what had obviously been a frantic drive across town. Behind them stood Anthony and Priscilla, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door to find Bradford's finger pointed directly at my chest. "What the hell do you think you're playing at, Torino?" he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "We waited in that conference room for 2 hours while you had lunch like some kind of vagrant. Good evening to you too, Bradford." I stepped aside slightly but didn't invite them in. "How was your meeting with the financial advisor? Don't you dare act innocent." Courtney snapped, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "This ridiculous behavior stops now. We have serious business to discuss." Anthony followed reluctantly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, what's gotten into you? You can't just stand people up like that. These are important connections for our family." "Our family?" I remained by the open door, letting the October evening air drift into my warm house. "Tell me, son, when exactly did Bradford and Courtney become part of our family? Was it before or after they decided to civilize you?" Priscilla's face went white. "You were listening to our private conversation. Hard not to when you're discussing my exile to Florida on speakerphone," I replied calmly. Bradford stepped forward, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. "You're completely out of your depth here. Old man, you have no idea how business works at our level." "Your level?" I almost smiled. "Bradford, your investment firm is 6 months from bankruptcy. Your sister's trust fund is nearly depleted. You're 3 months behind on country club dues." "What level would that be exactly?" The color drained from his face, but his voice rose in compensation. "How dare you investigate our private financial affairs? That's corporate espionage. It's called due diligence. Something you might have tried before approaching me about acquiring my business." Courtney was pacing now, her designer heels clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. "This is exactly what we're talking about. You think running a garbage truck company makes you some kind of business genius, but you're just an aging blue-collar worker who got lucky." "Lucky?" I kept my voice level, which seemed to infuriate her more. "I built my business from nothing while you were spending your inheritance on yoga retreats and charity galas." "That's enough," Bradford interrupted. "We didn't come here to argue about the past. We came to offer you a way out of the hole you've dug for yourself." "What hole would that be?" Anthony spoke up, his voice strained. "Dad, the bank called again today. They're starting foreclosure proceedings on our house. Priscilla's pregnant, and we could lose everything because of whatever point you're trying to make." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Pregnant?" I looked at Priscilla, who was staring at her hands. 12 weeks, she said quietly. "We were going to tell you after the anniversary party." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it despite everything. "When were you planning to tell me? Before or after you shipped me off to Florida?" Bradford threw his hands up in exasperation. "For God's sake, that was just brainstorming. We were exploring options for everyone's benefit." "Everyone's benefit?" I stepped closer to him, and he instinctively backed away. "Bradford, you were planning to steal my business, relocate my son, and exile me from my own family. Whose benefit was that serving exactly?" "You're being completely unreasonable," Courtney said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "We're trying to help Anthony succeed in a world you clearly don't understand." "I understand it perfectly. It's a world where people like you look down on people like me while living off our money." Anthony moved between us, his face desperate. "Dad, please, just restart the loan payments. We can work everything else out later." "Work it out?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for, who was now asking me to fund the lifestyle of people who considered me an embarrassment. "Anthony, your wife's siblings just spent 2 hours explaining to a financial advisor why they need to acquire my business to save their own financial skins. They're not trying to help you succeed. They're trying to survive. That's a malicious distortion of our intentions," Bradford said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're broke, desperate, and trying to manipulate my son into helping you steal what I've spent 40 years building." "This is getting us nowhere," Priscilla said, standing up abruptly. Vincent, bottom line. We need those loan payments restarted immediately. The baby is due in 6 months, and we can't have this kind of financial uncertainty. I looked at her for a long moment. You know what, Priscilla? You're absolutely right. You can't have financial uncertainty. That's why you and Anthony need to find a way to pay for your own house. Bradford's composure finally cracked completely. You vindictive old bastard. You think you can just destroy your own son's future because your feelings got hurt? I said quietly, that adults should pay their own bills. Fine, Courtney said, grabbing her purse. If that's how you want to play this, we'll handle it properly through our connections. Bradford has friends at the Better Business Bureau, the IRS, the State Licensing Board. We'll see how your little garbage empire holds up under serious scrutiny. Bradford nodded, his face ugly with rage. You have no idea what kind of people you're messing with. Torino, we have influence you can't even imagine. By the time we're finished with you, no one in this state will do business with you. Anthony looked stricken. Dad, they don't mean that. We can still work this out. Oh, we mean it, Courtney said, already heading for the door. Tell him, Bradford. We certainly do. Bradford straightened his tie, trying to regain some dignity. Mr. Torino, you have 48 hours to reconsider your position. After that, we'll be forced to take more serious measures to protect our family's interests. They filed out of my house like a defeated army, but Bradford turned back at the threshold. You'll regret crossing the Worthington family, he said. We always get what we want one way or another. I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched them pile into Bradford's Lexus, still arguing among themselves as they drove away into the October darkness. The house felt cleaner with them gone, as if their presence had left a stain that was only now lifting. But their parting words echoed in the sudden quiet. IRS investigations, licensing board complaints, Better Business Bureau reports. They weren't just threatening my relationship with Anthony anymore. They were going after everything I'd built. I walked back to my kitchen and reheated my Osobuco. Tomorrow, I decided it was time to make some calls of my own. If Bradford and Courtney wanted to play hardball with a man who'd spent 40 years dealing with city inspectors, union organizers, and municipal contracts, they were about to learn what real influence looked like. My phone buzzed with text from Anthony. Dad, please reconsider. We're family. I looked at the message for a long moment, then turned off my phone. Family, I'd learned, was about more than blood. It was about respect, loyalty, and understanding where you came from. It was time to remind everyone involved what those words actually meant. 3 days later, I was enjoying my morning espresso when I found my face staring back at me from page 4 of the Fairfield Business Weekly. The headline made my coffee taste bitter. Local waste management owner shows signs of business decline. There I was in black and white, an old photo from the Chamber of Commerce directory, probably 3 years out of date. Below it, a story that painted me as an aging businessman whose grip on reality was slipping along with his company's reputation. Vincent Torino, 63, owner of Torino Waste Management, has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior in recent business dealings, according to sources familiar with his operations. Recent incidents include abandoning scheduled meetings with potential investors and making unrealistic demands during family financial discussions. We're deeply concerned about Mr. Torino's decision-making capacity, said a source close to the family who requested anonymity. He's become unreliable and seemingly paranoid about normal business practices. We're exploring options to ensure his company's employees and customers aren't affected by his declining judgment. The article continued with quotes about my pattern of unprofessional behavior and suggestions that age-related cognitive decline might be affecting my business decisions. Bradford had painted himself as a concerned family member, forced to consider intervention for an unstable relative. No mention of their plot to acquire my business. No context about their own financial troubles. Just me, the aging immigrant whose mental faculties were failing along with his company's standards. I set down my coffee and read the article again, then a third time. The byline belonged to Marcus Webb, business editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the strategy. Bradford had called in favors, used his network of country club connections to plant this story exactly where it would do maximum damage to my reputation. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something that might have been admiration from my opponents. They weren't just throwing tantrums. They were systematic, methodical, playing a longer game than I'd given them credit for. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated what 40 years in the waste management business had taught me about information gathering and strategic planning. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. Marcus Webb's LinkedIn showed connections throughout Fairfield's financial community, including 3 mutual connections with Bradford's investment firm. The story hadn't just appeared. It had been carefully placed through a network of professional relationships. My phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Tony Marcelli's gravelly voice was grim. "Vinny, you see the Business Journal this morning?" "I saw it. It's worse than that, my friend. Word is spreading through the contractor network. Someone's been making calls, suggesting your company might not be reliable for future municipal contracts. Let me guess. Someone with connections to the Worthington family? That'd be my assumption. The good news is most of the guys who work with you for 20 years aren't buying it. But some of the newer city council members might be more susceptible to influence." I thanked Tony and hung up, understanding now that this wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. They were attacking my livelihood, trying to destroy what I'd spent 4 decades building. But 2 could play the investigation game. I spent the next 3 hours making calls to contacts throughout the construction and municipal services industry. By noon, I had a clearer picture of the Worthington siblings' real situation, and it was even worse than Tony had initially reported. Bradford's investment firm hadn't just lost clients. They were facing potential SEC investigation for misrepresenting returns to investors. Courtney's trust fund wasn't just depleted. She owed back taxes on phantom income from investments that had never materialized. Together, they were leveraged beyond any reasonable measure, maintaining their lifestyle through a house of cards that was already collapsing. More importantly, I learned they owed significant money to at least 4 different contractors who'd worked on various Worthington properties over the past 2 years. Landscaping companies, renovation specialists, pool maintenance services, all unpaid, all getting frustrated with excuses and delays. By afternoon, I had a manila folder thick with documentation. Bank records Tony had helped me obtain through his investigative connections. Copies of liens filed against Worthington properties. Photos from social media showing expensive purchases made during the same periods when contractors went unpaid. But the real gold mine came from Maria Santos, who cleaned houses for half the wealthy families in Fairfield. Maria had been Anthony's babysitter 20 years ago, and she still considered him family. "Mr. Vinny," she said when I called her, "I've been wondering when you'd ask about those people. They owe me 3 months' wages, and they still expect me to keep their house perfect for parties." 3 months? How much, Maria? For $1,000. They keep saying next week, but I see them buying new furniture while my bills don't get paid. I added Maria's situation to my growing file. $4,000 was pocket change to people who claimed to live at a certain social level, but it represented months of honest work for someone who cleaned their toilets and made their beds. That evening, I made one more call to Tony. "I need you to find out about their anniversary party tomorrow night. Guest list, venue, timing, everything. You planning something, Vinny?" "I'm planning to give their friends a more complete picture of who they're really celebrating." Tony called back within an hour. Fairfield Country Club, private dining room, 50 guests. All their social climbing buddies, plus some potential investors Bradford's been courting for his new venture. Apparently, he's trying to raise capital for some environmental consulting firm. Environmental consulting. I almost laughed. They were planning to rebrand stolen waste management assets as something more socially acceptable. Perfect. Can you get me a copy of that guest list? Already did. Check your email. I spent the evening creating packets, one for each of the 50 expected guests. Bank records showing the siblings' true financial situation. Documentation of unpaid contractor bills. Photos of expensive purchases made while working people went without their wages. Copies of the Business Journal article alongside evidence of their campaign to destroy my reputation. But the centerpiece was a simple timeline showing how $890,000 of my money had funded their lifestyle over the past 2 years, while they planned to acquire my business and exile me from my son's life. I printed everything on good paper, organized it in professional-looking folders, and loaded it all into my car. Tomorrow night, while Bradford and Courtney celebrated their sophisticated social circle, their guests would learn exactly what kind of people they'd been socializing with. My phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Dad, we need to talk before tomorrow night. Please." I looked at the message for a long moment, then turned off my phone. We have plenty to talk about tomorrow night, in front of all their refined friends who thought I was an embarrassment to their social circle. I poured myself a glass of my grandfather's wine and raised it in a toast to Maria's photo on the kitchen counter. "Tomorrow, my love, our son learns what happens when you choose appearance over family, money over loyalty, and status over the people who actually love you." The wine tasted like justice, and tomorrow night was going to be very educational for everyone involved. At 7:30 sharp, I walked into Fairfield Country Club carrying 2 briefcases and wearing my best charcoal suit. The anniversary party was in full swing in the Magnolia Room. Crystal glasses catching candlelight as 50 of Bradford and Courtney's closest friends celebrated Anthony and Priscilla's 5th year together. Through the tall windows, I could see the elegant scene inside. Round tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of white roses, servers moving gracefully between guests who represented the cream of Fairfield's social hierarchy. At the head table sat the happy couple, flanked by Bradford in his navy blazer and Courtney in a dress that probably cost more than Maria Santos made in 6 months. I paused at the entrance, adjusting my tie and taking in the scene. These were the people who mattered, according to Bradford, the sophisticated crowd who deserved better than crude Italian family traditions. Tonight, they were going to learn exactly what their hosts had been hiding behind all that sophistication. The hostess at the club in trance looked confused when I approached without a reservation. "Good evening, sir. Are you here for a private event?" "The Worthington anniversary celebration," I said, gesturing toward the Magnolia Room. "I'm family." She checked her list, frowning. "I don't see your name here, mister." "Torino. Vincent Torino. Don't worry about the list. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to see me." I walked past her into the dining room, and the nearest conversations gradually died as people noticed my presence. Heads turned, whispers started, a ripple effect of recognition and confusion spreading to the crowd. Priscilla saw me first. Her face went white, then flushed red as she half rose from her chair. "What are you doing here? This is a private celebration." "Good evening, everyone," I said, moving to the center of the room and setting my briefcases on an empty serving table. "I hope you don't mind me joining your party. After all, I've been supporting this family for 2 years. Seems only fair I get to meet the people they've been trying so hard to impress with my money." A murmur ran through the crowd. Bradford stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Vincent, you need to leave immediately. This is completely inappropriate. Actually, I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for tonight's celebration." I opened my first briefcase and began pulling out manila folders. "You see, I've been doing some research lately, and I've discovered some fascinating things about your hosts." I moved to the nearest table, placing a folder in front of each guest. "These are financial records," I said conversationally. 2 years of documentation showing how I've supported the Worthington family lifestyle. $890,000 in house payments, business loans, and personal expenses. Everything you see around you, the designer clothes, the expensive cars, the country club membership, all funded by the man they've been calling an embarrassment to their social circle. The room fell silent except for the rustling of papers as guests examined the evidence. I watched faces change as they absorbed the numbers, the dates, the undeniable proof of my financial support, and the family's deception. "This is outrageous," Bradford sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Vincent has serious issues with reality. He's been making increasingly irrational claims about our family's finances." "Irrational claims?" I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's sound system through the wireless speaker setup. "Let's talk about irrational claims, Bradford. Like your plan to acquire my business and ship me off to Florida so I wouldn't embarrass your social circle." I pressed play, and Bradford's voice filled the dining room, crystal clear and unmistakably arrogant. The solution is obvious. We need to civilize the family, starting with Anthony. Get him completely separated from his father's influence. Maybe relocate him to our Boston office. Put some geographic distance between them. Gasps echoed through the room. A woman in pearls stared at Bradford with disgust. Cynthia, surely you didn't actually say that about your own family member? The recording continued with Courtney's voice, shrill and dismissive. The worst part is how proud he is of that little garbage business. At the Hendersons' cocktail party last month, he actually tried to explain waste management procedures. I thought Margaret Henderson was going to faint. Laughter from the recording mixed with horrified silence from the dinner guests. I let the audio play for another minute, capturing their casual mockery of working families, their plans to steal my business, their contempt for anyone who actually worked for a living. When it ended, the silence was deafening. I looked around the room at faces filled with disgust, embarrassment, and dawning understanding of what they'd witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, I said quietly, I want you all to know the truth before you continue supporting these people's lifestyle through your business relationships and social connections. Because you should understand exactly what kind of family values your friends Bradford and Courtney actually represent. Bradford found his voice, high-pitched with desperation. You can't believe this manipulation. The man is clearly having some kind of breakdown. Am I? I opened my second briefcase and pulled out another set of documents. Then perhaps you can explain these contractor bills that have gone unpaid for months while you bought new furniture, or these tax liens on properties you claim were investment successes. I distributed the second round of evidence, watching as the social lead of Fairfield discovered their hosts owed money to everyone from landscapers to housekeepers. Maria Santos has been cleaning your house for 3 years, Courtney. She's also been waiting 3 months for her wages while you bought that designer dress you're wearing tonight. Courtney's face crumpled. That's not, we were going to pay her this week. This week? I smiled coldly. The same week you planned to acquire my business through fraudulent means? A man in an expensive suit stood up, his face hard with anger. Bradford, is this true? About the unpaid contractors and the business acquisition scheme? Bradford was sweating now, his usual composure completely shattered. Richard, you have to understand, this man has been harassing our family for weeks. None of this is what it appears to be. Really? Because what it appears to be is that you're broke, desperate, and you've been using my generosity to fund a lifestyle you can't afford while planning to steal my business and destroy my relationship with my son. Anthony spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, is all this true? About the business acquisition plan? I looked at my son, seeing confusion and hurt in his eyes. Every word, Anthony. While you've been worried about embarrassing them at social gatherings, they've been plotting to steal everything I've built and exile me from your life. The room erupted in conversations as guests examined the documents, compared notes, and began to understand the full scope of the Worthington siblings' deception. I could hear fragments of outraged whispers. 3 months behind on club dues, SEC investigation, unpaid domestic workers, lying about family support. Bradford made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Everyone, please. This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disturbed individual who can't accept that his son has outgrown his background. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings damning. The hypocrisy exposed for everyone to see. One by one, guests began standing up, gathering their things, and heading for the exits. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the social collapse beginning behind me. Voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the sound of a carefully constructed reputation being torn apart by the very people they tried so desperately to impress. It was the most beautiful anniversary music I'd ever heard. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Before I'd even reached the parking lot, guests were streaming out of the country club like water through a broken dam. Designer gowns and expensive suits fled into the October night, their owners' faces mixing embarrassment with fury at having been associated with such spectacular fraud. Through the tall windows, I could see Bradford gesticulating wildly at the remaining guests, his face purple with desperation. Courtney sat collapsed in her chair, mascara streaming down her cheeks as a carefully constructed world she'd spent years building crumbled around her in real time. Priscilla stood frozen beside Anthony, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My son's face was a mask of shock and betrayal as he finally understood what his wife's family had really thought of his father all along. I drove home slowly, taking a long way through Fairfield's quiet residential streets. My phone buzzed constantly with calls I didn't answer. The cleanup could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to savor the silence and the knowledge that justice had finally been served. The next morning brought chaos in multiple forms. My phone had 37 missed calls and a voicemail box, so full it stopped accepting new messages. But the real fireworks were happening across town, according to Tony Marcelli, who called at 7 a.m. with updates. "Vinny, my friend, you started an avalanche. Half of Bradford's investment clients showed up at his office first thing this morning, demanding to withdraw their money. Turns out a lot of those people were at the party last night. What about the contractors they owe money to? That's the beautiful part. Word spread to the trade network overnight. Every landscaper, painter, and handyman in Fairfield knows the Worthingtons got exposed for stiffing working people. There's a line of trucks outside their house right now, all demanding payment. By noon, the financial dominoes were falling faster than I could track. Bradford's investment firm announced it was suspending operations pending a full audit of client accounts. The SEC investigation that had been quietly proceeding suddenly became front-page news in the Business Journal, complete with quotes from concerned investors who had attended the anniversary party. Courtney's situation was even worse. Her ex-husband, apparently inspired by the previous night's revelations, filed papers demanding an audit of their divorce settlement. Turned out she'd been hiding assets during their separation while claiming financial hardship. The IRS audit that followed revealed years of unreported income from sources she couldn't explain. But it was the social destruction that fascinated me most. Fairfield operated on reputation and connections, and both siblings had lost theirs in a single evening. Restaurant reservations were mysteriously unavailable. Charity board positions quietly disappeared. Even their gym memberships were revoked due to payment irregularities. The country club held an emergency board meeting and voted unanimously to terminate the Worthington family membership immediately. Their names would be removed from all records, their photographs taken down from the member directories, their legacy erased as if they'd never existed in that rarefied world they'd fought so hard to inhabit. 3 days after the party disaster, Anthony appeared at my door. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance replaced by wrinkled clothes and exhausted eyes. "Dad, we need to talk," he said quietly. I stepped aside to let him in, noting how he looked around my house with new eyes. Not seeing poverty or embarrassment, but seeing home for the first time in years. "I lost my job," he said without preamble. "The marketing firm decided my association with the Worthington scandal made me a liability. 26 years old, and I'm unemployed because my wife's family are criminals." I poured him coffee and waited for the rest of the story. Priscilla's having a breakdown. She keeps saying this is all her fault for listening to Brad and Courtney. She wants to move back in with her parents in Vermont, but they won't take her calls since the news about Courtney's tax problems hit the papers. "What about the baby?" He looked up with surprise. "You still care about that? After everything that's happened?" "Anthony," I said carefully, "that baby is my grandchild. Of course I care." He started crying then, quietly but completely, the kind of tears that come from losing everything you thought mattered and finally understanding what actually does. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I chose them over you, and they were planning to destroy you the whole time. I threw away my relationship with my father for people who saw me as a useful idiot. I watched my son break down and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, not satisfaction at his suffering, but relief that he finally understood what had been at stake all along." We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee in the kitchen where he'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years before Priscilla's world had seduced him away from everything he'd been raised to value. "What do you want to do now?" I asked finally. "I want to learn how to support my family without depending on other people's money. I want to understand what you've been trying to teach me about work and dignity and taking care of the people who matter." It was a start. Not forgiveness, Not yet, but recognition of what had been lost and what might still be salvaged. That afternoon, Maria Santos called with news that made my coffee taste sweeter. "Mr. Vinny, you won't believe what happened. Mrs. Courtney showed up at my house with cash, crying, begging me not to sue her. For months' wages plus extra for my trouble. The contractors were getting paid too, according to Tony's network. Apparently, the siblings had liquidated every asset they could find to avoid criminal charges for fraud. Their cars, jewelry, furniture, everything was being sold to cover debts to working people they dismissed as unimportant. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Bradford was working as a junior analyst at a small firm in Hartford, his reputation so damaged that no one in Fairfield would hire him. Courtney had moved to Florida to live with her elderly aunt, working part-time at a boutique that sold the kind of designer clothes she used to buy without thinking. Their social circle had not just abandoned them, it had absorbed the lesson of their downfall. Suddenly, charity events featured prominent recognition of hard-working contractors and service providers who make our community possible. The same people who had once looked down on blue-collar families were competing to show their appreciation for authentic work and honest values. Anthony was learning those values the hard way, working construction with a crew that knew exactly who his father was and expected him to prove himself every day. His hands were getting calloused, his back was getting stronger, and his understanding of what real work meant was growing with every paycheck he earned through sweat instead of connections. Priscilla had made peace with her pregnancy and her reduced circumstances. She'd started cooking family meals instead of ordering catering, and she'd begun asking me to teach her some of Maria's old recipes. The woman who had once mocked my homemade wine was now learning to make sauce from tomatoes I grew in my backyard garden. But the most satisfying change was in my son. Anthony still had a long way to go to rebuild my trust, but he was learning the difference between earning respect and expecting it, between family loyalty and social climbing, between the values that lasted and the status that disappeared the moment it was inconvenient. It had taken 6 months to undo 2 years of damage, but we were finally heading in the right direction. Sometimes, I reflected, the most expensive lessons were the ones that taught you what really mattered. And what mattered, I'd learned, was never for sale. 6 months later, on a warm April morning, Anthony knocked on my door. He looked different, leaner, stronger, his hands rough with calluses from honest work. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by work clothes that had actually been worked in. Most importantly, he looked me in the eye when he spoke, something he hadn't done consistently in years. "Dad," he said simply, "I want to thank you." I stepped aside to let him in, noting how he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to respect tools and materials. For what? For saving me from becoming them. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one where he'd eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood. "I've been thinking about what you said 6 months ago, about choosing family over status. I finally understand what I gave up." I poured him coffee. Good Italian roast, not the designer blend Priscilla used to insist on, and waited for him to continue. "I'm working with Martinez Construction now. Residential framing, some commercial projects. The crew knows who you are, by the way. They call you the old man who taught those trust fund brats some respect." I almost smiled at that. "How's the work treating you?" "It's hard. Harder than anything I've ever done." His hand showed fresh cuts and permanent stains from lumber and concrete. "But it's honest. When I go home at night, I know I earned what I'm being paid. I know I contributed something real to the world." "And Priscilla? She's working too. Part-time at the library while she finishes her pregnancy. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry. Really sorry, not just because everything fell apart, but because she finally understands what Brad and Courtney cost our family." I looked at my son, seeing something in his face I hadn't seen since he was a child. Genuine humility mixed with quiet pride and accomplishment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the kind of confidence that came from doing difficult things well. "Anthony," I said finally, "I need you to understand something. I didn't destroy your wife's siblings to hurt you. I did it to save you from becoming them. I know that now." He met my eyes steadily. They were parasites, Dad, living off other people's work, while looking down on the people who made their lifestyle possible. If you hadn't stopped them, I would have ended up just like them. And what have you learned? That dignity isn't something you inherit or buy. It's something you earn through how you treat people and how hard you're willing to work for what matters. He paused, choosing his words carefully. That being Italian isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. That Sunday dinners with family are worth more than cocktail parties with strangers. The front door opened, and Priscilla walked in, her pregnancy now obvious at 7 months. She looked tired but healthier somehow, less brittle than she'd been during her socialite phase. "Mr. Torino," she said quietly, "I hope it's okay that I came with Anthony. This is your home, too, if you wanted to be." She started crying then, not the dramatic tears she used to deploy for effect, but the quiet crying of genuine remorse. "I'm so ashamed of what my siblings did, what they made me become. I spent 2 years looking down on you, while you were supporting our entire lifestyle." She sat down heavily, one hand on her belly. "I used to think Anthony was lucky to have married up. Now I realize I was the one who married up. Into a family that actually values loyalty and hard work." I looked at this young woman who had once considered me an embarrassment to be hidden from polite company. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by practical maternity wear. The perfect makeup had been abandoned for a natural appearance that made her look younger and more honest. "Priscilla, what happened to your brother and sister?" "Bradford's working at a small accounting firm in Hartford. He lost his house, his car, most of his savings paying back investors. He calls sometimes, begging me to ask you for help getting back into the local business community. I won't be doing that. I know. And honestly, I don't want you to." She looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "He never learned the lesson you were trying to teach. He still thinks he's a victim of circumstances instead of the architect of his own downfall. And Courtney, working retail in Delray Beach, living with our great Aunt Martha. She blames everyone except herself. You, me, Anthony, even her ex-husband. She says the whole thing was unfair, that you targeted them for being successful. I almost laugh at that. Successful at what? Spending other people's money? Exactly." Priscilla shifted in her chair, trying to get comfortable. "They never understood that success means creating value, not just consuming it. That respect is earned through character, not inherited through connections." Anthony reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was rough with honest calluses. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with your answer. Go ahead. Do you think you can forgive me? Not just say you forgive me, but actually trust me again? Let me back into your life as your son, not just someone you tolerate out of obligation?" I studied his face, seeing the man he was becoming instead of the man he'd been. The question deserved a thoughtful answer. "Anthony, forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's something you build back piece by piece, through actions that prove you've learned from your mistakes." "I understand. But I can tell you this. You're asking the right questions now. You're doing the work, both literally and figuratively, to become someone worthy of respect. That's more than your wife's siblings ever managed." Priscilla spoke up. "We want to have Sunday dinner here next week. If you'll have us. I've been practicing your osso buco recipe, though I know mine won't be as good as yours yet." Yet, I repeated, liking that word. Practice makes progress. We spent the rest of the morning talking about practical things. The baby coming in 2 months, Anthony's work schedule, Priscilla's part-time job at the library. Normal family conversations about real life, not social positioning or financial maneuvering. As they were leaving, Anthony turned back at the door. "Dad, one more thing. Next Sunday, when we come for dinner, I want to bring some pictures of Mom to show Priscilla. Stories about our family, about where we came from, about the values that made you who you are." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of pain I'd been carrying since Maria died. Your mother would have liked that. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, looking at Maria's photo on the counter. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "We saved our son." The house felt different now. Not empty, but full of possibility. Full of the promise of Sunday dinners where being Italian was something to celebrate, not hide. Full of the sound of a grandchild who would grow up knowing that dignity came from character, that family loyalty mattered more than social standing, and that the most important success was measured in the love and respect of people who truly knew you. Outside, spring was returning to Fairfield. In my backyard, the tomato plants Maria had loved were beginning to show their first green shoots. Soon there would be fresh sauce made with our own hands, shared around a table where everyone was welcome, and no one had to pretend to be something they weren't. It had taken 6 months to rebuild what took 2 years to destroy, but the foundation we were building now was stronger than what had come before. It was built on truth instead of pretense, on mutual respect instead of financial dependence, on family values that couldn't be bought or sold. Some lessons, I reflected, were worth the cost of learning them, and some victories were measured not in what you gained, but in what you refused to lose. I'd refused to lose my son, my dignity, and my sense of who I was. Everything else could be rebuilt from there. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your opinions of this story in the comments. To listen to more stories, click on one of the boxes showing on your screen. Thank you for watching.